Welcome, everyone. I'm Adrienne Mecca. As Amy has told you, I'm a Master Gardener volunteer for the Cornell Cooperative Extension. My presentation today is creating a sensory garden, and I'd like to look at this from three perspectives: individual use, public use, and then inclusive design. Okay, and I'm going to start with a quote. Okay, hold on. Gardening is the greatest tonic and a therapy a human being can have. Even if you have only a tiny piece of earth, you can create something beautiful, which we all have great need for. If we begin by respecting plants, it's inevitable that we will respect people. And I think this quote really resonated with me because I felt when you can increase an individual's ability to participate in outdoor spaces, you are really demonstrating a true respect for individuals, their differences, and you're promoting inclusivity. Okay, next screen. Okay, so let's start with what's the purpose of a sensory garden? Um, I'm going to emphasize the importance of accessibility today because as our population ages, so does the incidence of disability. While some disabilities are present at birth, others are acquired through illness, accidents, or aging. The creation of space which promotes awareness of our surroundings. We live in such a fast-paced world filled with sensory overload. You can't go to the store without hearing music playing, the aisles are crowded, goods enticing us to buy. Our phones are a constant distraction. So being able to retreat to a space which promotes mindfulness and relaxation is important to our well-being. Okay. Take a look at your existing space in your yard. Think about the additions which you can provide an experience you'd like to achieve. And what we try to create is a multi-sensory experience, an experience which incorporates our vision, our hearing, our tactile modality. All good teachers know that there are so many different ways to reach people. And we all have our different ways of learning and remembering, whether it's visually, auditorily, kinesthetically, or any combination. So by incorporating this into a garden, it enhances our experience. Providing an area of respite. We all need a place we can decompress, breathe, let go of the tensions of the day. It's all part of our self-care. A space which allows for hands-on experiences, which are more meaningful to some than others. Tactile experiences are very important to people with visual impairments, children, individuals with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. These hands-on experiences helps to anchor them in time and space and provide proprioceptive feedback. And a garden, if structured correctly, can be enjoyed by almost anyone. Okay, so planning a sensory garden. In planning a sensory garden, you would proceed in the same manner you would for any garden. Okay, so considerations of the location. How many hours of sunlight does this area get per day? 6 hours or more of direct sunlight is considered full sun. Part sun is 3 to 6 hours. A shady location gets very little sun. Knowing this helps to determine which plants will be successful in your garden and where you'd like to place your seeding. Plants need to be watered. This can be labor intensive, so you have to know where your water source is located. Can you run a hose? Are you carrying watering cans? This will greatly impact the success of your garden because if it's a really onerous task, you're going to avoid it. Westchester County, our hardiness zone is a 6B to a 7A. I live in Rye, and my zone is a 7A, and it's impacted by the proximity to Long Island Sound. Northern parts of the county tend to have cooler temperatures and more snow than the southern parts. My sister lives in Armonk, which isn't that far from Rye. However, she will call me to tell me she's getting snow, while I will have rain or maybe no precipitation at all. Also, you should be aware of microclimates. And microclimates are small areas, pockets, where heat or water received can be trapped near the surface, and that can impact uh, what grows, what's successful. Okay. Accessibility and paths. If it's a personal space, you can pretty much plan a garden in any way you like. I would, however, encourage you to have a clear path which isn't too muddy or sandy because it will discourage you from using it. When we talk about public spaces, this is a whole different matter. Okay, privacy. Does this area allow for shielding from public view with plantings or fencing? And how about the street noise? Is there some way to reduce the outside distractions? Sometimes planting a hedge of arborvitae or laurels is just enough to block out the noise and some of the street distractions if you live on a busy street. Soil quality for any new planting. I would recommend testing your soil first. This way you are aware of which remediations should be made before you even start, and this will improve the success of your plantings. Okay, public access. Is the space an area which is normally accessible to the public? Public spaces, there's so many considerations. First of all, how do you get to the garden? Is there parking? And how do you get from the parking area to the garden? Is it accessible to individuals with mobility issues? How are the pathways constructed? Can they be modified? Can they accommodate someone with a cane or a walker? We have to bear in mind that a wheelchair path needs 3 to 5 feet to accommodate most wheelchairs. Um, Ramps have to be 48 inches wide with a slope of 1 foot per 20 feet, which means a 1 foot rise or decline for every 20 feet. When a space is an issue, the path has to curve. Also, curved pathways are easier to negotiate than sharp corners when pushing or driving a wheelchair. I had recently been to Europe and obviously no ADA there. Um, the stairs are steep, there's cobblestone streets, there's narrow walkways. And all I could think of was how much longer could I travel to Europe? How much longer would I physically be able to manage uh, the, um, the, the, the terrain that's available there? Okay. Another thing to consider is the existing layout. What can be preserved? Which plantings will add to your garden? Can you keep the trees? Are there pathways? Can you modify them? Are there benches for seating? Okay, and here's just a look at some of the things you could add to your personal space. How would the use of this area be maximized, particularly if you have a small yard? What are you sacrificing? Are you willing to sacrifice some of the grass area for your seeding, for your plantings? But are you eliminating a play area for your children? It's really a personal decision and based on personal needs. In the corner, there are wind chimes. Some people love wind chimes, find them very relaxing. Some people find them totally annoying. Seating. Do you want to seat just for yourself, two people? Do you want to entertain in that space? The fragrance, we're looking at some honeysuckles. Some people find, the fragrance of certain flowers overwhelming. Do you want to add a fire pit? Add to the ambiance of the area. And then a water feature is always very relaxing. Okay. So in addition to just the personal comfort of this area, what are your additional goals? If you want to encourage pollinators, you should choose native plants which attract birds and bees. You can consult, obviously, with us, the Cornell Cooperative Extension, for a list of plants. The National Wildlife Federation has a website which will find native plants by zip code. The Native Plant Center at the Westchester Community College is also a good research. And I'm going to just give you a little bit warning about attracting bees. I know that, and this is a personal thing, my grandchildren are terrified of bees. So it requires often with children some education and training for children, how not to be afraid of bees. Not all bees sting. You know, not to, just not to interfere with them. So, just a word about that. For middle maintenance, you would be relying mostly on perennials because once well rooted in the correct areas, their watering needs are reduced. Annuals and plants and ponds require more frequent watering, and you'd want to also consider ground covers, which will inhibit weed growth, things like sedum and phlox. Okay. If you're going to entertain, you want to have seating, but you want people to be able to move around. Okay. If you have pets, you want to make sure you have pet friendly plants. Um, but also one of my caveats is if you have cats, beware of attracting birds because cats are a big threat to birds. Um, you can definitely mix vegetables, flowers, and herbs. You're just going to make sure their sunlight and soil needs are compatible. And by planting flowers, you will attract pollinators to your vegetable plants. Zinnias and sunflowers are just an extra benefit. Okay, environmentally friendly practices. As with any garden, you would really want to try composting. Um, and there's a multiple ways you can do this, even in a small yard. I used to have a kind of rolling container. Some people don't like those, but I had a small one in my backyard. But it worked really well. I put in kitchen scraps and leaves and grass cuttings, and always had some beautiful, beautiful soil to use. Um, so again, you're enhancing the soil and you're reducing waste. You want to make sure your garden is safe for children if you have children or children that visit. You want to avoid toxic and thorny plants, and you want to make sure your pathways are clear so they're not going to trip. Okay, and so again, a personal decision is do you want a space with a lot going on, or do you want a calmer environment? Because if you like a lot of stimulation, you could put in spinners, chimes, you could put in plants with lots of fragrance. Most people want a calmer environment, but again, it's all about personal preference. Okay, in addition to plants, when we're looking at these gardens, is hardscapes. And when I'm talking about hardscapes, I'm talking about the more permanent features of a garden. Pavers for pathways, fencing, walls, edging, raised beds. But you have to be careful because some communities have restrictions regarding the amount of non-permeable surface a property is allowed to have due to water runoff. It's an issue. You have to be a good neighbor by being aware of water runoff. You don't want it going in your neighbor's basement. Um, it's interesting because in our community, we actually had a lawsuit about the opposite. Uh, there was construction on the back hill of a property, and the newly constructed houses actually rerouted the water. So the man at the lower property, who had a beautiful little pond, was left dry. And he actually had a lawsuit against the builders because it disrupted his property. Also, for those of us along the sound, we have all kinds of consideration for safe the sound and what goes into our wastewater. Okay. If you have an existing wall or fence, think about how it can be incorporated into the space. Painting a fence can either blend into the surroundings or stand out. You can also use that for hanging baskets. Pathways, planks, gravel, mulch, stepping stones, all can be successful pathways in a personal garden. So bird feeders and bats, you have to remember to be consistent in filling and cleaning them. And again, I'm going to say you have to watch for the cats if you have multiple cats particularly, because cats are a threat to birds. Okay, water features, pools, bubbler units which recycle the water are are environmentally friendly because you're just recycling water and it gives a nice little sound. Okay, but you have to be careful not to have standing water, which attracts mosquitoes. So you want to make sure that your whatever water you have can move. Again, I'm going to go back to wind chimes. Wind chimes can be very calming or highly annoying. Too many sounds can create a cacophony. So, again, personal preference. Seating. Do you want comfortable seats for lounging, reading, meditating, or do you need benches to accommodate a larger number of people? Sand can be used as a path, but it can track into your house. So I kind of like the idea of having a small contained area where you can run your hand through it or dig because it's a really nice sensory experience. It's a great activity for kids. You can create treasure hunts by burying small toys, rocks, shells. But again, you have to be careful. Back to the cats. You don't want them to use it as a litter box, so it has to be covered. Okay, gardens in public spaces. Accessibility is key. Okay, again, where is the parking in relation to the garden? How is a person going to get into the garden? Is there a ramp? Is there a walkway? If there are stairs, is there some way around? When a public garden is open to everyone, it helps to know if there are pockets of individuals living in close proximity. For example, who are going to be your end users? Do you have a group home nearby? Is there a daycare? Is there a nursing home or senior groups or schools? Because then you can adjust some of the aspects of this garden to accommodate these populations. You have to be aware of local ordinances. There are wetlands, neighbors to contend with, tree ordinances. We have leaf blower ordinances in my town. So you have to, these are all the things, if you're starting out, you're going to have to be aware of. Okay, and then who's responsible for this land? Okay, financially, is the funding ongoing? Who holds the insurance policy? Is there staffing or funding for maintenance? Is there sufficient support for this project? Unfortunately, people come and go. So if it's only one individual who's pushing this through, um, your your chances for sustainability are slim. So you really need to have a really community buy-in and a group of people, which will help to make sure that it is a sustainable. This is a big project, so you want to make sure it's sustainable and that it will move forward for many years. Okay, sensory gardens for school. Now, we get a lot of questions for school gardening, and there's a lot of challenges with this. First of all, schools are generally in session for 10 months, and summer is really when the garden requires most attention. So gardens are a year-round obligation, and well-planned spaces need maintenance. But anyway, let's just go back to and be a little bit more positive and say, okay, so what are our considerations? First of all, the age level of the students will impact the design of the garden and their ability to participate. Does the building have a significant number of students with disabilities? Because everyone's included. Everyone has to have access. So you have to think in terms of that. In planning the garden, are we thinking, is this going to be instructional to support academic units? Or is it going to be a place for students to calm down and practice mindfulness techniques? And again, I'm going to go back to it must accommodate every student in the school. Do you have support from the principal, teachers, custodial staff, PTO, Board of Education? I know of a incident where a member of the PTO planted bulbs just along the border of the school entryway, and custodian cut them down when they came up, because again, his job is to keep it neat, and it looked messy to him. So you've got to make sure you've got buy-in from everyone. Um, Community organizations, which will be willing to collaborate. Okay, and right now this is very tricky because in this day and age, it's hard to really recommend bringing in outside people into a school, a school community. Um, I I was involved in a school where they had an extremely successful school garden, um, but it had a separate entryway, so people really weren't entering near the school. And the community kind of maintained it during the summer. Um, so that was very successful, and they had complete backing by the school administration. But again, in this day and age, it's something you have to be really careful of because everyone would have to be background checked and the access would have to be limited. Okay. Planned activities for students can supplement the curriculum and provide opportunities for students to have access to nature. And there's just some ideas about some of the things that students can do in a garden. However, you have to remember, this isn't everybody's cup of tea. You're going to have kids who I don't like bugs. I don't like to get my hands dirty. You have to remember that. So if you can think in terms of maybe some alternate activities, which, the ones who aren't so enthusiastic could do. If you don't like to get your hands dirty, maybe you can water. If you're afraid of bugs, well, let's try to get over that. Let's try to identify the bugs that are beneficial to a garden and some that are pests. Okay, I included this slide because establishing a sensory garden in a school may be too complicated a task. A sensory path is much easier to create and can allow for proprioceptive activity to improve coordination and calm the brain. Kids get their sensory breaks, and 10 minutes is really all a student needs really to reorganize themselves. In the old days, um, we used to do recess in the morning and recess in the afternoon. There's too much curriculum nowadays. Kids do not get enough time to really kind of blow off some steam. So creating this on a playground or on pathways, it can be, you can do this individually. It's a great project for an art teacher. And there are also commercial kits, which can be purchased to create these. Okay. Something else to consider if space or resources are limited, this courtyard incorporates many features using a raised bed. And this is just in the courtyard in the school. You can see the water, you can see the stones, which can provide a tactile experience. And then again, the plants um, are there. Again, some fragrance, some plants that are great to touch. That could all be a great addition to a school community. Okay, accessibility. Okay, can an individual with a life-limiting condition participate in this space physically, cognitively, and emotionally? If we value inclusivity, this is a really important factor. I remember when I was working in a school, the PTA was funding a playground, and I requested one swing, and I'm just saying, one swing be handicapped accessible. And I was told no. They had no idea what being able to access playground equipment would have meant to my two wheelchair bound students. So we really have to be very, very empathetic to the plight of others. And we can't be so cavalier to think that we won't ever become disabled. Okay. Also, so when planning a space, consider the barriers. Some can't be changed, but most can be modified. Okay, mobility issues. So when we're looking at individuals who have mobility issues, stairs, can we create an alternate pathway? Can we install a temporary ramp? And remember, when you're doing a ramp, slope is very important because it can be very, very dangerous. When I was in high school, again, a long, long time ago, well before the ADA, we were in school with a young man with cerebral palsy. And for some reason, I was thinking about this later in life, and I had gone to high school with my husband, and I said, "Do you know how there were stairs in that building?" And believe me, there were no accommodations. Nobody said, "Oh, let's put his classes on the first floor," not like we do nowadays. And I said to my husband, how did that young man get up and down the stairs? And he looked at me and said, oh, he said, we'd carry him. He said, whoever was the biggest guy at the top of the bottom of the stairs would carry him. Two guys would carry him up and would carry him down. And I think to myself, just think of the impact for that student not being allowed to be independent and it's how he had to depend on his more capable classmates. Um, so again, always have to think about the impact on other people. Okay, pathways. Are they wide enough? Are they obstacle free? Look for roots, rocks, uneven terrain. Raised beds are great for people with limited mobilities. It puts things in reach and without having to bend down. And again, in your area, do you have sufficient seating? And what's the seat height? And are there arms? Because often people with mobility issues can sit down, but have difficulty standing back up. And here's some good examples of pathways everyone can use. Notice the curves, no sharp turns, and the paving is very, very even. And in the middle, so you can use a gravel pathway as long as it's hard packed. Okay. And again, here you can even use grass as long as it's maintained, it's relatively level, and if the grass is cut short. Um, I like for the photo on the right, I really love this pathway and that bridge because look at how wide the opening is. It not only allows you can get a wheelchair through there, but it also allows for someone with a walker who has a companion. So I really think that's a very nice example of an accessible kind of bridge. Okay. Okay. I'd like to take some time to talk about accommodations specific to certain disabilities. However, all of the things I mentioned can enhance a garden experience. So I'm going to start with when we talk about people with visual impairments, it's important to understand the concept of functional vision. It isn't just the measurement of the vision, not the acuity, a 2200, whatever we're used to. It's how the individual is able to use what vision they have. Now, often we can have people who will be declared legally blind, but still have some really good use of their vision. Um, Also, in visual impairments, you have to think in terms of field losses. So sometimes people lose their vision from from top over their head, looking down, side to side. They have loss in depth perception, which is why you have to watch curbings should be marked and highlighted. Um, so again, visual impairments, not just blind, but there's gradations of that. You want to always keep paths clear of any potential trip hazard, uneven pavement, really critical for the visually impaired. And again, marking curbing where possible in a bright yellow, or sometimes and I know you've seen this on sidewalks, that bump that you can feel that as you're walking. Okay, plants which vary in size and color can be enjoyed by many individuals with visual impairments. Individuals with visual impairments rely on auditory, olfactory, and tactile cues. So whatever we can add to a garden will enhance their experience. When possible, adding braille lettering to print size is helpful for description and plant identification. Also, consider using plastic chaining as a border to assist in guiding along the paths. Okay. To enhance a garden experience for individuals with hearing impairments, consider adding plants with vibrant colors and fragrance. Also, adding plants which can be touched, safely touched. Sculptures which provide vibrations can increase an individual's participation in the sensory garden. Okay, neurodiversity. Individuals with ASD or autism spectrum disorder often present with difficulties in sensory processing. So when designing aspects of a garden, one must balance engagement, how to engage, yet not overstimulate. Providing a safe corner or play tunnel provides an individual with an opportunity to self-regulate and minimize sensory input. Gives a kind of a time out. Let's an individual, pull away and kind of, re- re-regulate. Okay, this is also true for individuals with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder who may have difficulty sifting out sensory information. They're very easy to overload. You want to provide a more calming experience. Also bear in mind that neurodiverse individuals may be overly sensitive to sound, touch, temperature, sun exposure may be an issue. So I have to think about providing areas of shade. I also want to include uh, individuals with cognitive delays. Hands-on experiences are so important to their understanding of the world, and presenting information in small units is best for all. So small sections, if you can have small sections in your garden, that presentation will help neurodiverse individuals just focus just a little bit better. And just a word about multiple disabilities. You have to be aware that it's not uncommon for an individual to present with deficits in more than one area. Okay, sensory gardens for dementia. And again, when we start to think about planning for individuals with dementia, I want to be clear on the definition. Dementia is not a specific disease, but rather a general term for the impaired ability to remember, think, make decisions that interferes with doing everyday activities. Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. So you're going to have many of the same considerations I just mentioned for neurodiversity. However, in addition, plants may help to trigger memories and initiate conversation. A rose, a daisy, a preferred or disliked vegetable might help trigger the individual's memory. Um, oh, I remember the smell of the roses. I remember when I got my first orchid, my first corsage rather. So those kinds of things. Um, the environment also needs to help with sensory regulation. And when we're talking about sensory regulation, again, body temperature, balance, and the information that is coming in. Okay, garden features for the five senses. So, okay, so sound in the garden. So if you think about it, but think about sitting in a garden, what do you hear? What do you hear without the visual? Because we're all very visually oriented. And if you just take the time to stop and close your eyes and think, what are the sounds you hear or like to hear in a garden? Plants which rustle in the wind chimes, birds and bees, trickling water, gravel, an audio system. So here's some good examples of fountain grasses, which can be used and do make a nice ruffling sound. This photo was taken at the Rye Arts Center. It's designed as a rain garden. However, any of this could be incorporated into a sensory garden, and I can only imagine what kind of sounds it makes when it's a heavy rain. Um, okay, when we think of wind chimes, here's some suggestions for creative ways to reuse materials. Old cutlery, driftwood, seashells, and sea glass are all materials which you can reuse to make your own wind chimes. I recently attended the orchid show at the Bronx Botanical Gardens, and I came across this sign. The sound in this area was very, very subtle. It was musical, it was human, it was spiritual. It was a very interesting experience. And I was also surprised to see that there are soundscape composers. So, again, another creative way to add some sound to your sensory garden. Okay, accentuating sight in the garden. Okay, when you think about visual engagement in the gardens, what are the things that catch your attention? Mine particularly is I go right to colors. Colors are what really draw me in. But that isn't the only only thing that really engages your vision. Contrast does. Even um, in greenery, because you have lighter green or darker green, or you have things that are, full leaves, or things that are very sculpted. It's you put in objects of interest, sculptures, um, spinners, things that move. Texture is very important in being visually engaged. Here's two photos of how water can be a nice element and very engaging, because you look at the reflection, it gives you a totally different perspective of the garden. That now takes in the window that's reflecting, and it also gives this black background to the rocks and to the surrounding grass. Here, you're looking at interspersing color, shading, plants of varying heights, texture. It just increases your engagement in the surroundings, but it also, if you have a visual impairment, you're getting the pops of color. Um, so again, and you look at the varying heights again on the right hand side, you go from a lower to a little bit higher, and then you have the branch of the tree which frames it. Okay, and here just adding these plants into a corner of a yard that's planted in a bathtub, and what a splash of color that gives just in the seating area. Okay, and this is just a short list of plants that will add color to your plantings. Okay, I particularly love the Swiss chard bright lights because they're also can be eaten. But all of these are great plants for color. Okay. If we want to add a tactile experience, and remember, tactile is not only touching, but it can be walking. So you can get that feedback from your feet. Um, so we want to think about contrasting elements. Hard, the walls, the pavement, smooth, stone, your railings can be smooth, soft flowers, leaves, soil, rough tree bark, sea pods, solid marble sculpture, benches, fluid. Mosses can feel, to me, would feel very fluid. They're soft and smooth, but also fluid, and granular, sand and gravel. So some plants with great textures, celosia, love to touch it. The middle is thornless roses. And then, of course, the succulents, not the ones with the pointy edges, of course, but succulents are always great to touch. And then here's some additional plants to consider. Lamb's ear is just, just a joy to touch. And to me, I love the feathery ornamental grasses. I can't help but touch those myself. Okay. All right. But just to be, this is just a bit of warning, not that you would intentionally use these plants. However, they can creep in and you just would want to monitor, because if we're encouraging people to touch plants, we want to make sure everything is safe. So we have, we have the poison ivy. Underneath the poison ivy, we have the hogweed, and we have the wild parsnip, sumac, cow parsnip, and then stinging nettle. Okay, smell. And what would a garden be without an olfactory experience? Remember, plants with fragrant foliage will tend to provide fragrance for longer periods of time than flowers. So consider that when planting. Okay, taste. Okay. I, I didn't really want to include this slide. However, it is included as recommendation in multiple articles. Um, I wouldn't want to include plants to taste in a public garden. I guess you could do it with appropriate supervision. If you wanted to provide vegetables, herbs, berries, edible flowers. But again, this would need to be very well supervised. Have to remember that many common garden plants are toxic. Allergies have to be considered. My other concern is, particularly if this is open to children, young children or children with cognitive delays, I wouldn't want to create a situation in which they view plants as edible, all plants as edible, because it could be an overgeneralization. And they may not have the appropriate judgment to differentiate. So, as I said, It's in the literature. I would tend to avoid it. Okay, so what's the feel of the gardening? Is it calm or is it stimulating? Again, what's your goal? Can you have both? Because if you want a calm garden, you're going to look for your pastel colors, your curved lines, your pools of water, your natural looking plants, gentle sounds, mild fragrance. If you want stimulating, you're going to go with the brighter colors, the harder lines, your prune trees and shrubs, stronger sounds perhaps, and stronger smells. Okay. Here are some great annuals that are um, which are good. Annuals change your garden up. You can always, every year you can make it look a little different. You can change your plantings, but your basic garden and what you're going to start with are your perennials, because with any luck they come back every year. Um, I want to point out that you see I have bamboo on there. Again, some articles mention bamboo. However, we all know it's an invasive plant which can spread. And planting some species, golden bamboo and yellow grove bamboo, is prohibited in New York State. However, there are varieties of non invasive bamboo, but you should always check with your county or town because they may have their own list of prohibited species. But bamboo could be used appropriately, non-spreading, non-invasive, perhaps to make a nice border and add a little privacy to your area. Okay, please remember we must also protect our pets and service animals. Okay, so there are numerous plants which are dangerous to pets. It varies with species. And I would advise you to check the FDA.gov website or our Cornell University veterinary site to find out which um, which plants may be toxic to your pet. Okay, so gardens to visit. I want to thank my fellow master gardener, Joanne McKendry, for this recommendation. Wickham Park is one of the largest sensory gardens in the United States. It's located in Connecticut, so it's not far from us. Um, and it's interesting because what they have, in addition to their plantings and their curved pathways and their sculptures, all the things I've mentioned, they have toy trains. And that's, I think, a very engaging property for a sensory garden, particularly for children, and particularly with children with yeah, along the spectrum. So I think that's really cool. Okay, and this next one is this photo is thanks to Amy Albin, and it's from the Sensory Garden at the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens. And what I loved about this is it a couple of things. First of all, it creates this kind of living wall that has great texture, great variation in shading. Also looks like, something you'd just love to touch, and all different textures, a little pointy, a little bit smooth. And you could use something like this as either dividing sections of your garden or as your boundaries. Okay. And I'm just going to end with here were a list of my references and resources.